Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that you never once thought they could betray you? I did, and it nearly cost me everything. Betrayal, especially when it comes from someone you call family, shatters your world in ways you never expect. But it's how you respond that defines you. My name is Caleb Rivers, and I am 32 years old. I'm an entrepreneur who built my business from scratch. Over the years, I've worked hard to establish myself as a trusted professional in my field. But beyond business, I was someone who believed in loyalty above all else, especially within my family. My father, James Rivers, had always been a cornerstone of my life, and my younger sister, Sophia, was my closest confidant. We were more than just family, we were a team. I had always thought of myself as the protector of my family, the one they could rely on when things got tough. It wasn't just about business or money for me. My relationships with my family members were built on something deeper, something more meaningful. I believed in mutual support, in honesty, and in the idea that no matter what, we would always have each other's backs. But trust is a fragile thing. And when it's broken, it leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew. My world was turned upside down when I discovered that my own family had been hiding something from me, something that would change the course of my life forever. What they did was shocking, not just because of the act itself, but because of the people involved. My own sister, Sophia, and my father, James, had been working against me in ways I never saw coming. It was a betrayal that cut deep, one that shattered everything I had worked so hard to build. Yet, in that moment of devastation, I realized something important: how I responded mattered more than the betrayal itself. And so, rather than falling into the trap of emotional outbursts and impulsive actions, I chose a different path. I decided to take a step back, to think through my next move carefully, and to respond in a way that would not only protect what I had but would also bring justice in a way that no one could argue with. It was a late evening when I first stumbled upon the truth. I had just finished a meeting with a potential investor for my business, a deal that I thought could catapult us to the next level. Exhausted but excited, I headed back to my apartment, expecting a quiet night to reflect on the progress we were making. But when I walked through the door, I felt something was off. It was a subtle shift, like the air had changed around me, but I couldn't quite place my finger on it. I sat down at my desk, scrolling through emails when I noticed something unusual: an encrypted file in the shared folder I accessed only for family business affairs. It was an odd file name, nothing that looked like it belonged to our regular documents. Curiosity nagged at me. I opened it, unaware of how much my life was about to change. As the document opened, my heart sank. The file was a list of transactions, dates, and amounts, many of which were linked to a series of accounts I had never authorized. I ran my finger over the details, my mind racing as I pieced the puzzle together. The transactions pointed directly to my father, James, and my sister, Sophia. They had been siphoning off funds from the family business, large sums of money I had invested in expanding our operations. Worse still, the transactions weren't just casual oversights, they were deliberate, planned actions aimed at undermining my authority and control. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I scrolled through more files, each one confirming my worst fears. They had betrayed me. Not only had they been stealing money from the business, but they had also been in communication with competitors, working behind my back to undermine everything I had built. The trust one had placed in my family was now a lie. I had been so sure of them, so certain that we were a team. Yet here I was, discovering the deepest betrayal of my life, not from a business partner or a friend, but from those who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The weight of the revelation hit me like a punch to the stomach. The sense of betrayal wasn't just about the money, it was about the years I had spent believing in a lie. I had never questioned their loyalty. In fact, I had gone out of my way to ensure they were both taken care of. I had protected them, trusted them, and supported them. Yet, they had been plotting against me the whole time. The people I had loved most were the ones who had torn my world apart. I didn't know what to do at that moment. Anger bubbled up within me, but I held it in check. My first instinct was to confront them, to demand answers, but deep down, I knew that would be a mistake. This wasn't a situation where yelling or threats would solve anything. It wasn't about them hearing me out, it was about them realizing that I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I had built. I had to take control of this, and the only way to do that was to remain calm and calculated. The hours following that discovery were a blur. I spent the night pacing around my apartment, trying to make sense of everything. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the enormity of what had just happened. But the one thing I could do was plan. I knew that to truly get back at them, I had to be smart. This wasn't going to be a hasty reaction, it would be a quiet, strategic response that would hit them where it hurt the most. I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't let them off easily. But I also knew that confrontation wouldn't work in my favor. The best course of action would be to gather solid evidence, make sure I had every angle covered, and strike when it would do the most damage. The most important thing was not to let my emotions dictate my actions. I couldn't afford to act out of anger, I had to play this game with precision. I sat at my desk the following morning, staring at the computer screen, contemplating my next move. The evidence was there, glaring back at me, but I knew that if I acted too quickly, I would lose my advantage. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let my anger dictate the course of this situation. No, I was going to remain calm. I was going to be patient. And most importantly, I was going to be methodical. I took a deep breath and made a list of everything I needed to do. First, I needed to gather more evidence. I couldn't rely solely on what I had already found. There had to be more, something that would leave no room for doubt. Secondly, I needed to create a strategy. This wasn't just about confronting them, it was about making sure they would never be able to do this again. Lastly, I had to stay in control. They may have thought they could deceive me, but they hadn't counted on me being able to think clearly in a moment of crisis. For the next few days, I went about my routine, but my mind was constantly working. Every time I interacted with my father or Sophia, I kept my emotions in check. I said nothing. I smiled, I laughed, I did everything to maintain the facade of a normal family. But inside, I was building my case. I started by looking through every financial record, every email, every message. I even set up a secondary email account to track their communications without raising suspicion. I had to be thorough. This wasn't about catching them in a simple lie, it was about making sure that when the time came, I had undeniable proof. I also tapped into resources outside my usual circle, hiring an investigator to gather additional information. I needed to be sure that everything I was seeing was true, and that nothing had been missed. Each step I took was deliberate and calculated. I knew that I couldn't afford to rush. I was playing the long game, and the longer I waited, the more prepared I would be. I wasn't acting out of rage, I was acting out of necessity. I was going to make sure that when the time came, I would expose the truth, and nothing would stand in my way. The next week was spent in the quiet hum of investigation. I spent countless hours combing through records, pulling files, and speaking with trusted colleagues who could help me verify details. I even went so far as to access some of my father's accounts, nothing too invasive, just enough to confirm the patterns I was beginning to see. Every piece of evidence I gathered only solidified my resolve. There was no longer any doubt, my family had been working against me, undermining my business and, in essence, my very life. As I dug deeper, I uncovered more connections to competitors, shocking revelations about how my sister and father had been leaking confidential information. I also discovered emails that revealed they were attempting to sell the company out from under me, making deals behind my back. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. They had conspired to take away everything I had worked for. But I remained calm. I took notes, I saved emails, I kept every piece of evidence in a secure place. I was methodical in my approach. Each day, I would review the information I had gathered, cross-referencing it with what I already knew. I didn't need to confront them just yet, I wasn't in a rush. Every piece of evidence was another step toward my ultimate goal, exposing the truth when it would matter most. I even set up a meeting with a lawyer, just to ensure I had the legal groundwork laid out in case things escalated. There was no telling how they would react when they found out that I knew the truth. But I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. The day of the confrontation arrived. It wasn't a grand showdown like you see in the movies. No yelling, no accusations hurled across the room. It was calm, precise, and to the point. I had arranged a meeting with my father and Sophia at a neutral location, away from the house, away from distractions. It was time to let them know what I had uncovered. As we sat across from each other, I could see the nervous glances between them, the unease in their posture. They had no idea I knew the full extent of their betrayal. I started with a simple statement: I know what you've done. At first, they tried to deny it, but as I began to lay out the evidence, transaction records, emails, and phone records, they couldn't hide from the truth anymore. Their faces fell, and the silence that followed was deafening. I didn't shout, I didn't demand anything from them. I simply let the evidence speak for itself. I stayed calm throughout, even as I saw the guilt and shame begin to settle in their eyes. I didn't need to make a scene. The facts were all I needed to make my point clear. Their betrayal had been uncovered, and there was nothing they could say to change it. The confrontation was over, and yet, the real work had just begun. It was one thing to expose the betrayal, to watch them squirm under the weight of their own lies. But that was not enough. I could have let the moment pass, walked away and gone on with my life, but there was something deeper at play here. Something that demanded more than just the satisfaction of having uncovered the truth. I knew that the consequences for my father and sister had to be both fitting and calculated. This wasn't about seeking immediate revenge, it was about making sure they fully understood the cost of their actions and how much they had underestimated me. They had stolen from me, betrayed me, and tarnished everything I had worked for, but they also underestimated my resolve. At first, I had considered a variety of responses. I thought about cutting them off, severing all ties with my family for good. I considered public exposure, letting everyone know what they had done. But I quickly realized that revenge, in the form of emotional outbursts or public humiliation, would only drag me down to their level. I was better than that. I wanted something more lasting, something that would not only ruin them but also leave them with no way to come back from this. That's when I began to put my plan into action. The evidence was already in my possession, but now I needed to use it strategically. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble or lash out. I wanted to hit them where it would hurt the most, financially, legally, and emotionally. I needed them to feel the full weight of their actions. The first part of my plan was legal action. I'd consulted with my lawyer to ensure that I had all the necessary paperwork to launch a full-scale investigation into the financial crimes they had committed. Using the evidence I had collected, I filed a report with the authorities. The scale of their theft was staggering, but it was their betrayal of the trust one had given them that made it so damning. I knew this would be a long process, but it was the right one. My father and Sophia had worked to dismantle the business from the inside, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. The legal process was slow, methodical, and not something I could rush, but I was patient. I had been planning this for months, after all. I also filed an injunction against them, freezing their assets, as a way of ensuring they couldn't use the stolen funds to cover up their tracks. They were cut off from their usual luxuries, and I made sure that no one in the business could assist them in any way. I had the power to remove them from the business entirely, but I wanted them to realize that there was no escaping the web I had carefully woven. The law was on my side now. As I waited for the legal proceedings to unfold, I also started working on the next phase of my plan, the public exposure. This wasn't about gloating or seeking revenge in the traditional sense. It was about making sure that my family would never be able to recover from their actions. The truth had to be known, and the business community needed to understand that betrayal like this wouldn't be tolerated. The second part of my revenge was a carefully crafted plan to expose the betrayal to the public. My father and Sophia had always been seen as pillars of the community, respected figures in the business world. They had built their reputation on trust, and now it was time to shatter that illusion. I called in a trusted journalist who had covered business stories for years, one who had the credibility and the influence to make a real impact. Together, we put together a comprehensive exposé detailing the fraudulent activities my family had been involved in. It wasn't just about the money, they had betrayed the very principles they had preached for years. They had lied to clients, investors, and the public. They had actively conspired to undermine everything I had built. The article was published in a major business magazine, and the fallout was immediate. The public's reaction was swift and unforgiving. My family's reputation, which they had spent decades building, was torn to shreds in a matter of hours. People who had once admired them began to distance themselves, and the business world turned its back on them. Their associates, clients, and friends were now questioning everything they had ever said or done. The shame they had brought upon themselves was now visible to the entire world. It wasn't just about losing their reputation, it was about realizing that no one would trust them again. The damage was irreversible, and I knew it would leave a lasting mark on them, far beyond anything I could have done with a few angry words or a heated argument. I didn't need to see their faces or hear their apologies. The truth had come to light, and there was no turning back. The damage had been done, and I knew they had to face the consequences of their betrayal. In a way, exposing them publicly was not about punishment, it was about justice. It was about making sure that their actions were seen for what they truly were. The final phase of my plan was the most personal. Once the legal battles were set in motion and the public had been made aware of the truth, I could finally take a step back and reclaim what was mine, peace of mind. The satisfaction of knowing I had acted with dignity and grace, without succumbing to the urge for immediate retribution, was my reward. The legal and public consequences my father and sister faced were only part of the equation. The real victory came from within. I had been betrayed by the people I trusted most, but I had shown myself that I could rise above it. I had taken the high road, calculated every move, and outsmarted them without ever raising my voice in anger. I had regained control of my business, my reputation, and my life. In the months that followed, my business began to recover. Clients returned, investors regained confidence, and the foundation I had built was stronger than ever. The damage done by my family's betrayal had been significant, but it had also forced me to grow in ways I hadn't anticipated. It had pushed me to be more strategic, more resilient, and more careful with the people I let into my life. The road to recovery wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I was no longer the person I had been before the betrayal. I had learned the value of patience, strategy, and emotional control. And though I had been deeply hurt, I came out of the experience with a stronger sense of self and a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly protect what mattered. Looking back on the ordeal, I can see how much I've grown. The betrayal I endured was one of the hardest things I've ever faced, but it taught me lessons I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I learned that not all battles need to be fought with fists or anger. Sometimes, the quietest response is the most powerful. Sometimes, you don't need to raise your voice to make your point. You just need to take control, stay focused, and strike when the time is right. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about justice. It was about showing the world that betrayal has consequences, and that trust, once broken, can never truly be repaired. The cost of their actions was far greater than they could have ever imagined. But the cost to me, personally, was worth the peace and the closure I now have. In the end, I reclaimed my life. Not through violence, not through chaos, but through strategy, patience, and a quiet, calculated response. The power of staying calm in the face of betrayal cannot be underestimated. It's a lesson I will carry with me forever. If you've ever faced betrayal or found yourself in a situation where trust has been broken, remember that you have the power to take control. It's not about seeking revenge in the traditional sense, it's about staying calm, being strategic, and reclaiming what is rightfully yours. If you enjoyed this story and want more content on navigating life's toughest challenges with strength and dignity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How would you respond if you were in my shoes? Let's keep the conversation going and support each other through the ups and downs of life. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is living your life on your own terms. Stay strong, stay smart, and never let betrayal define you.